Okay, chapter 9. So, Mina and Jonathan Hocker are married and agree never to discuss what happened to Jonathan. Renfield escapes again. Dr. Abraham Van Helsing is consulted about Lucy's mysterious illness, and Lucy has a real relapse and a sudden turn for the worst. So, I think the function of chapter 9 is to continue to increase the threat from this unseen Dracula. So a sense of alien menace dominates the narrative, but there is no direct reference to horrific or terrible events. Instead, we are consistently placed in a situation of sustained ironic observation because of the fragmented narrative and the constant shifting of perspectives. So what you find in this chapter is a sequence of coincidences that advance the plot. I think it's also very important to note that this chapter deals a great deal with the idea of religion, specifically the Christian or Catholic faiths. We're in Budapest. Mina is writing a letter to Lucy. It is the 24th of August, 1897. And we are in the Abbey, where Jonathan has been recuperating. So it's significant that Jonathan finds refuge in an abbey, as we discussed last chapter. It's the idea that it's a safe place where God and people of faith are able to look after Jonathan. So when Mina arrives, she says she immediately starts off by saying she should have to do some nursing. So not only is this a stereotypical female role in Victorian society, and the idea that the woman does the nursing and looks after the man, but it is also a realistic expectation because he is unwell. So it shows not only her devotion to Jonathan, but also her kind-hearted nature and her willingness to support her future husband. She does describe him as a complete wreck, and the suggestion is therefore that what Jonathan Harker has experienced is so very, very awful that he has blocked it out of his memory, and the only time he relives this is when he is asleep. So he's also very frightened of going to sleep. He has terribly troubled dreams and talks again in his sleep. So another example of somnambulism. Okay. I'll come to that in what's on the screen in a second. So this novel, and I think novels that are of the Gothic and supernatural genre, explores the relationship between the conscious and the conscious apprehension of reality. So what we view as reality when we are aware, and what our subconscious views as reality. So obviously, in terms of the Gothic tradition, we have the dream, which is the realm where the ego and the consciousness break down. Civilized behavior is removed. It is the opportunity for us to behave in a reckless, uncivilized manner. And I think the inarticulate and incoherent imagination of unacknowledged urges just adds to the sense of chaos and ensuing madness in the story. So again, the link between dreams and madness is very apparent. In fact, Mina goes on to describe the terrible things which no mortal can experience or can live with. So it's the idea again that Jonathan is plagued by the supernatural. Okay, so in her letter to Lucy, which remember is dated on the 24th of August, she talks about how Jonathan's journal comes up. Jonathan asks him to get something from her coat pocket, and it's his notebook. If you recall, his journal ended on the 30th of June, and he still has it with him. And it is sealed, it's closed, but is going to be later opened and transcribed by Mina for the benefits of the book. So what you need to understand is, although the journal is finished, it is to a large degree what holds together the entire novel, the entire narrative. It's his journal, his observations, which become instrumental in the resolving of the mystery that is Dracula. So interestingly, his experiences as well as Dracula's diabolical plan are going to be sealed away by Mina as a wedding gift. And we'll get onto that in a second. So Harker is suffering from amnesia. Again, structurally, this is a clever way of making sure that the characters in the text cannot make specific connections, so they're constantly left in the dark, and which again builds tension and frustration for the reader, who is able to make links between all of these, and you find yourself wanting to yell at the characters and say something, but you can't. Okay, so plot-wise, he has done this on purpose. He is certainly making sure that we are frustrated. And now we move on and we go immediately to the marriage between Mina and Jonathan. Okay, and if we think about it, why has Mina opted to push it forward, and she's so desperate to get this wedding over and done with? Well, there's obviously a couple of reasons. Firstly, Jonathan could very well die, and so getting married would be, I suppose, from a Muslim point of view, she would be his spouse, and therefore she would be looked after. But similarly, if they love one another, this is what they want to do. They want to get married before he dies. But also, by Mina marrying Jonathan before she knows what happened and she knows about the encounter with the three vampires, obviously she won't be able to kind of do anything about it after they're married. So the marriage itself is not necessary for us to spend time on it. It's more the events that follow. So their marriage shows, I think, how Mina embodies the notions of duty and faith and endurance. Okay, so she's desperate to find out what's happened to Jonathan. She wants to understand what caused this madness, and yet before she does know, she's still willing to make this commitment and form this bond. All right, and so she turns her ignorance into this kind of bond. She shows how much she trusts Jonathan by taking the journal and giving it to him, or sealing it as a wedding gift. So she says, I took the book from under his pillow and wrapped it up in white paper and tied it with a little bit of pale blue ribbon which was round my neck, and sealed it over the knot with sealing wax, and for my seal I used my wedding ring. Then I kissed it and showed it to my husband, and told him I would keep it so, and then it would be an outward and visible sign for us all our lives that we trusted each other. So she is being a stereotypical Victorian wife. She is she realizes it's not her place to question her husband about his past or what he's been up to, but she shows her trust and her faith and her love in him by refusing to take advantage of his journal. Again, you could argue that she believes that if something is that stressful that it has created such stress and mental anguish for him, then she does not really want to read it because of the impact it might have on her. So why is she so subservient? Well, she's certainly worried about his health, but also she is fulfilling a stereotypical wifely role. So, and you see, it's things like this, where Mina, on one hand, is so strong and determined and prepared to be a female journalist and writes in her diary and makes statements about tolerance. And then on the other hand, she fulfills the stereotype of being a subservient wife. So that's when I ask about to what extent does Stoker limit her as a character, limit her development. These are the kinds of things you could be looking at exploring. So what does she do? She seals the journal, she wraps it up, seals it with wax, makes an imprint of her wedding ring, which of course is significant because it's the bond. She gives it to her husband, and she gives him a chaste kiss when she does this. So I find it quite interesting that we talk about that the kiss is mentioned, and it's a chaste kiss, and the chaste kiss given at the end of the wedding ceremony to seal the marriage contract is all very chaste, which is in direct contrast to the kisses experience between Jonathan and the vampire brides, which he has recorded in this journal, which he's not opening. Okay, so this contrast, I think, serves to show to us, the reader, that Mina is very, very virtuous. She's so happy to have her husband back that she is prepared to not find out what happened to him, and it shows her trust in him. Interestingly, I think she is portrayed in a way that is very, very virtuous. I mean, you look at Mina and she's the ideal woman. She is loyal, she is determined, she doesn't question, which is in contrast, I think, to the archetypal view of woman, who is seen as women are seen as the archetypal view of woman as the reason we have original sin. So remember, Eve in the Garden of Eden, she is the one who ate of the fruit, the forbidden fruit, in her pursuit of knowledge, and she is the one who gave it to Adam. So the idea is that the females are to blame for the downfall. But unlike Eve in the Garden of Eden, Mina chooses to remain ignorant. She is not pursuing the knowledge, and again, because of this portrayal of Mina as so virtuous, it highlights the difference between Mina and Lucy. So Mina being very saintly and virtuous, whereas Lucy is very shallow and frivolous. So she says, Lucy, dear, I want you to see now, and with the eyes of a very happy wife, whither duty has led me, so that in your own married life you too may be as happy as I am. So Mina is fully aware that of the differences between herself and Lucy, and she realizes that she is the person who needs to be the role model. She needs to be a role model for Lucy. Lucy needs guidance. So she's pretty much saying in her letter that, look, I'm a happily married woman and I trust my husband. And I'm devoted to him. You too should be the same. So because Mina is in Budapest, she is unable to be with Lucy, who's moved back who's about to move back, to her London home. And the irony here is that Mina is now in the uncivilized East, and she's safe, whereas Lucy is in the civilized West, but she is in grave danger. Okay. Lucy writes a letter back to Mina, and she starts her letter with reference to oceans of love and millions of kisses. So we've got examples of hyperbole and metaphor here, which is indicative of, especially the hyperbole, indicative of Lucy's personality. She's over the top. She talks about how the strong air would soon restore Jonathan. So again, a reminder of the belief that fresh air was a cure-all. Ironically, again, she'll also be thinking about her experience maybe in the field of cows and her going to get some fresh air and how she felt better for it afterwards. Okay. She says, I have the appetite like a cormorant. A cormorant is a large, black, voracious seabird. Okay. And her reference to this just shows how erratic her character is. Cormorants are supposed to be insatiable, and the implication is that Lucy is being very impacted, has been affected by Dracula and is susceptible to his corruption, and she is the one who has now become insatiable. Okay, so her appetites, she's talking about, she's living life well, but she's eating, and she says, Arthur says I'm getting fat. Obviously, this is supposed to be a celebration of the fact that she is recovering. She's now able to eat and sleep and rest, and she's getting better. But it kind of also creates a rather unsettling sense of physical indulgence. It's like she's overdoing it. So although she seems to be improving, this is a pattern, and we are well aware that as soon as she improves, obviously she then goes backwards, and when she goes backwards or reverts, it's even worse. Okay. We then have Dr. Seward's diary. Please note that this is dated the 20th of August, so it's written before Mina's letter to Lucy talking about her marriage to Jonathan. So just keep that in mind in terms of the text jumping. It does not go chronologically. So again, it's well worth putting all the dates in chronological order so you can match up what happens and how things happen at the same time. So on the 20th of August, we've got Renfield being a little quieter. So I think it's important also to note that this chapter is the point at which Seward begins to take over the burden of the responsibility for the narrative. And he will now be providing the bulk of the narrative. And he talks about Renfield. He says there is a cessation from his passion. And so in other words, he's pausing. For the first week after his attack, he was perpetually violent, and then one night, just as the moon rose, he grew quiet. Please again remember, the moon and the lunar cycles are associated with the Latin word luna, from which the English word lunatic comes, and it's the idea of people being mad and their moods being controlled by the moon. So again, we've got this vampire / gothic tradition. Renfield is howling at noon time. Remember, during the day, Dracula's powers are weakest, so he seems to be howling and behaving erratically when his master's presence cannot be felt. But at sunset, when Dracula comes out to play, suddenly Renfield's behavior is calm. Okay. Seward goes on to say that even the offer of a kitten or even a full-grown cat will not tempt him. We are reminded that Renfield's earlier behavior, where he was feeding flies to spiders, spiders to birds, and he wanted to feed the sparrow to the kitten, it reinforces the idea that as Dracula gets closer and closer, Renfield's behavior grows and becomes odder and more erratic. In fact, he says, I don't take any stock in cats. I have more to think of now, and I can wait. So again, it's dramatic irony because we know what he's waiting for, and the repetition implies that he is eagerly awaiting the arrival of his master. As we go on, we realize it's 3 nights has the same thing happened, violent all day. during the day and then calming down at night. Again, please remember 3 being the cabalist number, cabalist meaning magical, and note that when does his behavior alter? When it's at nighttime and darkness, which again is a Gothic idea. So we can clearly see here as a reader the influence Dracula has over certain characters, i.e. Lucy and Renfield, but the other characters are unable to see this. He goes on to say, on the 23rd of August, our bird, when he found the cage open, would not fly, which is a metaphor. He does mention Disraeli, just to inform you, Disraeli was a British Prime Minister and novelist, and by all means do go and look into his life. But he talks about how the patient has once more escaped, and it is because of the unexpected. So again, the implication is that how is Renfield escaping? It must be a supernatural reason, and something else is assisting him. So again, this reminds us of the Doctor and his war with faith, because he can't explain why he is escaping. There must be something that something supernatural about it. Okay. Renfield dashed down the passage, and again he went in to Carfax's house, and they find him pressed against the old chapel door. Now, in a churchyard where people are buried, it's called Consecrated Ground. So people who committed suicide were not able to be buried in consecrated ground because they would be going to hell. So consecrated ground is ground that is blessed. So the irony that in both Castle Dracula and in Carfax's house that Dracula seems to have a chapel is again perhaps a 2 fingers up to the idea of Christian faith and burial, because Christian beliefs believe you have to be buried in order to go to heaven. But this ground, instead of being consecrated, has been desecrated because it is still being used for burial purposes, but the bodies are going to purgatory. Okay. So now we've got Seward out in looking for Renfield, and he looked into the moonlit sky and he sees a big bat. So again, we understand the significance of this, the traditional Gothic feature A, but B, the fact that the bat is a physical manifestation of Dracula, but Seward's unaware of this. So it would appear that Stoker is using this chapter, I think, to introduce the character who represents the hope of resisting Dracula and who will go on to be the architect of the rest of their salvation. So obviously Seward has a very big role to play. We then move on to Lucy Westmore's diary. It appears Lucy is trying very hard to mimic Mina's writing style, but she is not as motivated. She certainly doesn't want to be a lady journalist, so she lacks the drive, and her comments or the content seems to be mostly concerned about the fact that Arthur will be upset by her changing appearance. Is she implying perhaps that Arthur is shallow, or is she shallow, or is she worried that her frailty will upset him because he cares too much? Again, just some thoughts to have in the back of your mind. So she goes through her diary entry, looking at how things, she's having more bad dreams, and we are reminded that Dracula is getting closer and closer and closer to in the coast, and the impact of this is quite severe on Lucy. We're now on the 31st of August, and we have some interaction. We have correspondence between Arthur Holmwood and Dr. Seward. All right, and it starts with Arthur writing to Seward, and just to put a little bit in context here, the idea of madness was certainly believed to be an unmanly infliction. It was sorry, not infliction, affliction. It was not something men were supposed to suffer from. It was more girly. So Arthur has written this letter, and he's inviting Seward to come and help him. He fears that Lucy is obviously suffering from a form of insanity, and he obviously needs things to be very discreet and dealt with very discreetly. So he calls not only on his friend, but also a specialist in madness. What the reader needs to bear in mind, however, is that, of course, Seward's also a jilted suitor. So keep thinking about that as the tale unfolds. We also discover that Lucy's mum is ill, as well as Arthur's father. So it should both of them die, Arthur and Lucy are their last offspring, their last in their line of their blood. And again, remember, please, that blood in this text was not just about the physical that is pumping through our veins. It's also the idea of inherited bloodline and family line. So if these two die, Arthur and Lucy are the only ones left in their bloodline, and it means both would inherit wealth and social status. So the ill health and the need for discretion, why? Well, it furthers the plot development. We've got Mrs. Westenra's ignorance and weak heart are important, especially later on, and we'll look at that when we get there. Plus the imminent death of Arthur's father is handy because it takes Arthur away from Hillingham. Hillingham, please remember, is the name of the house, of the Westenra house in London. Okay, so as Arthur points out towards the end of his letter, is that the only one left to protect Lucy is the depressed and exhausted Dr. Seward. Okay. Seward responds, talks about Lucy's health, talks about Mrs. Westenra's health, says that he realizes Mrs. Westenra does not know that Lucy is very, very unwell. And when she and Lucy doesn't want her to know. Just to let you know here, they talk about going into Lucy's boudoir. Boudoir would be a term for like a lady's study or bedroom area where she would be able to entertain. It comes from the French, which means a place to sulk in. So, yeah, I always find that quite amusing. Note as well that as Seward goes through all of this and describes things, he talks about how bloodless Lucy seems, the idea that she's very, very pale, she's very drawn, she's looking very ill. But again, the phrase or the adjective bloodless is interesting because, again, we, the reader, know that she is physically bloodless because of Dracula. Talks about, he says she complains of difficulty in breathing satisfactorily at times and of heavy lethargic sleep with dreams that frighten her, but regarding which she can remember nothing. Okay, so again, the reminder that sleep and madness and dreams and madness are linked, and the fact that she is having these awful dreams is a sign of possible madness. Seward then briefly introduces an expert in obscure and rare diseases, Professor von Helsing. So we've got our last major player in the story being introduced to us in this chapter. Well, he is a metaphysician. Not necessarily somebody who's involved in the occult. That was the belief that metaphysicians were heavily involved in the occult. Instead, it's a specialist in philosophy and someone who's really interested in the theory of knowledge and abstract concepts. So how do we know what we know, and why do we behave the way we do? So as we read through this, and Seward describes him as a philosopher, metaphysician, one of the most advanced scientists of his day, etc., etc. He has iron nerve, temper of the icebrook, an indomitable resolution, self-command. So Seward is clearly got great faith in this man, who we find out is his mentor. And Van Helsing, therefore, is being portrayed now as someone who has an open mind, he's got strong nerves, he's got a cool temperament. Okay, he doesn't get wild easily. He's resolute, he's determined, he's self-possessed, he's tolerant. And in addition to all of this, obviously, he is well liked, he's kind, he's true-hearted and sympathetic. Okay, so really what we're seeing here is Dracula's moral opposite. They seem to have a number of qualities in common. Both are powerful, strong-willed, determined, resourceful, and dedicated to wisdom and esoteric philosophy. Both are foreigners, but both speak excellent English. But the major difference is that Dracula is fearsome and cruel. He's an unsympathetic aristocrat, whereas Van Helsing is a healer, and he is doing noble work for mankind. So Van Helsing later announces that he will soon be arriving and giving us this information. We then have further correspondence between Arthur and Seward. We have reports of Lucy's health and the fact that it's waning, the fact that Helsing has come and gone. He's seen Lucy and he's off to investigate further things. We get the idea that he is a bit secretive. And then we get back to Seward's diary, and we have another focus on Renfield, our zoophagous patient. Remember, that's one that eats things. I suppose we all are zoophagous then, unless we are vegan or vegetarian. But as it goes, I want you to move towards the last section of the diary where it says, midnight, another change in him. I had been to see Miss Westerner, whom I found much better, and had just returned, and was standing at our own gate looking at the sunset, when once more I heard him yelling. Okay. As his room is on this side of the house, I could hear it better than in the morning. It was a shock to me to turn from the wonderful smoky beauty of the sunset over London, with its lurid lights and inky shadows and all the marvellous tints that come on foul clouds, even as on foul water. The description of this London sunset really highlights just how depressed Seward is. He seems fascinated by this polluted air, and he seems to highlight the isolation of the beauty, and which is like his isolation. He's this breathing misery. He has this desolate heart. Again, just a reminder that all the fog and the foul air and the pollution is just to remind us of the significance of the Industrial Revolution. Please remember, it did have a huge impact on Victorian way of life. So perhaps Stoker is trying to demonstrate how down Seward is and how melancholic he is, but also he's trying to remind us that London is a modern city. It's a civilized center, it's a civilized East, and it is now under threat from this terrible monster. I think as you see, this chapter just focuses on, like I say, the decline in Lucy's health and introduces us to Van Helsing. But I think it's also quite interesting to, again, realize and focus on the theme of concealment and secrecy and the effects of this. Because, again, Arthur's making every effort to conceal Lucy's possible madness. I mean, it's under the idea of discretion, but the 19th century fear of mental disorder was often linked to the idea of the hysterical female who needed to be controlled or cured or contained. Things like Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and Bertha in Jane Eyre certainly demonstrates this. So, however, the big issue with the idea of bottling things up and hiding and concealing them is the idea that it's creating a pressure cooker, and perhaps Stoker is looking at more than just hiding actions. Maybe he is looking at the ramifications of what happens when people don't get things out in the open and don't explore their feelings about certain situations.